Hello, and welcome to At the Movies with Mike and Marie, a show where two film professors talk about movies. I'm Marie Westhaver.
And I'm Mike Giuliano.
And today we're going to talk about Wicked for Good and Rental Family, starting with Wicked for Good, which is, we must discuss this movie, Mike, because this is the Christmas movie and all advertising roads lead to this movie. Where do you want to start?
We have to start with the box office. 2025 has been flat at the box office overall and actually disappointing in many ways. And frankly, from a mathematical standpoint, the movies need things like this. And there's been some interesting commentary recently about how this movie, for instance, is rated PG, and some of the big box office films this year are PG. No big surprise there, but they're not even PG-13. The rumination there is that, well, so many people, certainly so many adults, just sort of sit home and say, well, should I go to the movie theater or just wait to stream it, whatever? But they have kids, and kids can be insistent. Mom, I want to see it, and I want to see it this weekend, as in the opening Friday or Saturday. That's driving a lot of this, and God bless them, really, because this is helping to sell a lot of popcorn and keep the movie theaters going. So I've actually been in some crowded theaters recently because of films like this. And I've got to say quickly, as we're taping in early December, Zootopia 2, which has really been quite astounding, actually, worldwide in terms of the box office. Yes, in China, everyone's going to see it. So I don't want to get sidetracked with that, but just simply by way of movie industry notes to point that out, that this is really surf trend and kind of leading it in some ways. And in general, it does segue to what I do want to talk about more so, which is what I call a math lesson. So we're today right now talking about Wicked for Good. And I don't want to get bogged down and I don't want to get lost in the weeds or bogged down there whatsoever. But when you talk about The Wizard of Oz, there's a lot of genealogy going all the way back to 1900. And I'm not going to go through all that. And Marie knows it even better than I do in terms of all the books and all the iterations of this material. But what I will point out is that this latest film has, as Marie indicated, done extremely well and really, really well. And what's unusual there is not totally unusual, but that it's, a two-part venture, if you will. This is where the math kicks in for me. So the direct source for this film is the 2003 Broadway musical Wicked, which I saw on tour at the Hippodrome Theater here in Baltimore. So I know the Broadway show. The Broadway show has a running time of 2 hours and 40 minutes, okay? Now, the film version of that, part one, which came out a year ago, part one has a running time of, what a wonderful coincidence, has a running time of 2 hours and 40 minutes, an identical running time. I mean, it's just quirky that way. But the caveat here, or the asterisk, or whatever you want to call it, is that part one here of the film version ends where the first act of the Broadway show ends. So it's already drawn out that way. Now here, lo and behold, and that film, of course, did extremely well. So now, lo and behold, a year later, we get part two. Part two has a relative brevity. It's only 2 hours and 18 minutes. So when you do the math and all that, one reservation I have about the film is just simply that it takes that material and it's so drawn out. It's so attenuated. And what you end up with is a very busy film. There's a lot of incident, a lot of activity, a lot of color, a lot of extras running around, very busy. And yet the musical material, the score, the Stephen Schwartz score is, for the most part, rather generic. I mean, there's not too much that really stands out there. It's the kind of music that gets the job done in the moment, but on the drive home, are you really humming tunes or anything? Not particularly. Now, what does hold the film together, really? And I'm obviously not a huge fan of it, but what honestly really does hold it together is it's that central relationship between Elphaba and Glinda, or should I call her Galinda, whatever. We can fuss over names. But the fact that, in part one, what's at the heart of that in terms of the character dynamic? Well, Elphaba is misunderstood because she's green, basically. That's what it comes down to. If you're green, people are going to treat you differently. Okay. So and it's handled very well in the film in that respect. And Cynthia Erivo certainly, she's really good in that role. And in that first part, of course, then the focus is primarily on Elphaba, really. It looks more at her psychology, if you will. In that first film, Glinda character, played by Ariana Grande, is very much presented as a self-interested Barbie. Borderline caricature, it's the performance that makes it seem like it's more than that. But as written, there's not a whole lot to work with beyond the kind of Barbie stereotype there. What I liked about the second part, which is not quite the same as loving it, but what I liked about the second part is that Ariana Grande really comes into her own here, in part because the character does, because the character of Glinda, who's seemed like not necessarily an airhead, but just like self-centered very much in the first film, like aren't I pretty, don't have a lot of friends. That's still here in part two. But within the storyline, she's learning some lessons, namely the truth about Oz, that the Wizard of Oz and other things aren't quite what they seem. They're not quite as honest as they should be. It's potentially very dark material. Film treats it relatively lightly, but it does have some darker undercurrents that way. And those are potentially quite interesting. The second thing that I think helps carry the second film is simply that both of the performers I mentioned are quite good. I mean, as actors and certainly vocally they are. And even when the vocal material, the songs ain't great, it's good enough and they have voices to carry it. So when you finally, relatively late in the film, get them in a duet, you've been long waiting for this, to have the two of them like face to face and voice to voice that way. And so really for the target demographic, as I coldly call it, for the intended audience, boy, that's a moment to be savored. And the film really plays well to a full house. And believe me, in all sincerity, how much I appreciate that, to sit in a crowded theater, that people really respond to the material. And adults as much as children. So there's something to be said for that. And I've already said far too much, so I turn it over to you.
Well, I'll start with the soundtrack. I downloaded it from Spotify before I went, so I would refresh my memory of the old songs and hear the new one. So by the time I was watching the movie, I think I enjoyed it more because I knew all of the songs. And of course, it goes without saying that the two leads have incredible voices, and it is showcased beautifully in the movie. Agree with you completely about the time flab. This is a movie that likes looking at itself. It gives you lots of eye candy. You can understand why they wanted to linger. But both part one and part two, I think could have fit into one movie at a reasonable runtime, or one long movie that encompassed everything. I think it belabors its point. But I will say, in terms of what I liked and didn't like, it's kind of two sides of the same coin. Okay, so yes, growing up, I was thrilled to find the other Frank Baum books in the library and find out that the story of Oz went on. I was also enchanted when the Maguire books came out, starting with Wicked, where what she read did not challenge the story at all. It was just, oh, you look at it a different way and everything still falls into place. It's just a different point of view of what was going on, but everything still held together. The parts that I loved the most in Wicked for Good were the moments when you saw the overlap between the story with Dorothy and, the characters in the original Wizard of Oz. I think people will be more lost if they haven't seen the original Wizard of Oz than if they haven't seen the first part of Wicked, although I think you need to see that too. But when you would see like the back of, Dorothy, or like the shadow of her doing something that you remember from the story, it was funny. And I really liked that part. What I didn't like was how it just didn't hold together the way the book did, in terms of certain things just didn't make sense anymore. I mean, the story of the Tin Man and the Scarecrow, I don't want to give anything away. Why would they want to go visit the wizard? It makes absolutely no sense, given what you know that they know, having watched Wicked 1 and 2. Did that bother you at all, Mike?
Yeah, it did. I had the same mixed response there. I was really intrigued by it because I kept thinking, well, okay, we're dealing with prequel material here. How are they going to handle it as they approach, should we call it the present day, the present moment, whatever the universe is that we're in. But I was actually on a technical level quite interested in that. And it's the director, John Chu, and the whole crew, they handle this extremely well on a technical level. In other words, that you only see Dorothy's shoes. You only see like a side angle of somebody. It's a kind of tease, but an appreciated tease. Like, you don't want to spoil everything, because what do you get into at that point? You'd have to almost like take actual footage from the Wizard of Oz and somehow meld it with, and I know with AI now they can do all that, and I don't want it done, but I know you could do that. But I'm intrigued with how they lead into this and how the stories quasi overlap in a way. But then as they quasi overlap, they don't quite make sense at the level you just identified. Like, because, when you do know the source material as well as you do, you got to wonder, well, why would these particular characters want to go see the wizard? It's just not really explained. And I think just to cut through that as to, well, pragmatically how to handle this. And since I talked about PG before, so let's have some parental guidance. If you are a moviegoer who has a young child who really wants to see this, I would strongly advise, and this is happy advice to give, have them watch The Wizard of Oz first. You really should watch the original film, and of course nothing approaches it in terms of magnificence. You should approach and watch the original film. Then when the kids have seen the original film, when we get the footage that Marie and I are talking about right now, not that it's totally clear, because it's really not, but it's less confusing, okay? Because the way it's handled here, if you don't, I mean, you would think 99% of a population must know the original film, but if you're a small kid, you may not have seen it. And then suddenly, like, well, what's this Tin Man and this Straw Man? And, what are these things? The lion, what are these creatures? How'd they get here? And who's this person we only see from the ankle down? I mean, who's this Dorothy, whatever? That's where you need to have some background there. And the film presupposes that. And I think, sensibly, because most folks will be aware of it. But again, I keep saying, if you've got a small kid, the small kid may not know all of that, which is so imprinted otherwise on our collective memories. But I think it's where the film gets into some trouble, because, when you say the story goes on and on and on, it does indeed go on and on. Where would it go on from here? When you have this kind of box office, do you think they're going to rest content with part two? And that's it. They've now finished Wicked. I don't know. You can get Wickeder. You can, and I think what might well happen here is maybe it will then actually meld with the first one in such a way that we have Dorothy meeting the Avengers.
Don't say that out loud, Mike. You're just going to give them ideas. So, other problems with Oz. In the original Wizard of Oz, yes, you found out that he was a fake, but he was a good person. Here, it's a completely weird story in that, I couldn't help but think, I think the band is America that did the song about how Oz never did give anything to the Tin Man that he didn't already have. At that point, it's weird that the Tin Man would want a heart and the Scarecrow would want a brain, instead of just having the magic spell broken and have them go back to being people. Instead, they settle for a token for something they already have.
These are metaphysical mysteries that I can't solve for you.
I also think they completely threw the lion under the bus with a really lame joke, and that's all he got.
Actually, it's interesting. Among those several characters, the lion doesn't get very much screen time, does he?
No.
And so I don't know what to make of him even.
Yeah, I feel like they had to give each one of the characters their close up.
I think they only had him for a few days. He had to go back to Zootopia. So
that's a good one. All right, Jeff Goldblum as Oz. What did you think?
Well, here's where the film also gets into some trouble, because you make a very good point. In the original Wizard of Oz, yes, he's a fake, he's a charlatan, he's a con man, this and that, snake oil salesman, whatever. But he's genuinely a good person. He's likable, he's funny, harmless in his own way, even though he seems harmful at times. There's a real gentle sense of him ultimately there, isn't there? And yet in this film, partly because Jeff Goldblum has some edge as an actor, has that quality, and it's where the film gets into some borderline serious material or ruminations, or frankly with the wizard, somebody who's really not very nice, not very likable. And I'm honestly not quite sure what to make of that, because the film, which tends to treat the dark material very lightly, can't completely dismiss it, right? It's still there as a kind of undercurrent. And I felt slightly unhinged by some of the scenes with this particular wizard. I thought, well, it's PG rated, but boy, it could easily skate into PG-13 or something, couldn't it? And what do you think of that? Because I just think the film itself doesn't, in terms of tone, I think it has some tonal balance issues. I'll put it bureaucratically, tonal balance issues. What do you think?
I felt, I'm all for expression of any kind in the movies because I'm an adult. Could have done without what I'll call the romance.
Ooh, I want to talk about that. Here's the deal, and it's my ulterior motive for mentioning that the movie is rated PG and not PG-13. So, no disrespect to the actor Jonathan Bailey, who plays Prince Fiero. because it really is a storybook cliche, right? It's really such a stereotypical character. He just needs to be handsome and smile, have nice teeth, and and so on. And so I don't know and he does, exactly what that character as scripted calls for. So I'm not dissing the actor whatsoever here. There is a scene. First of all, I wonder how much of that romance we even need. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Second, particularly in a movie that's really targeted at kids. And then secondly, if you're going to go there, how should you go there? So there is a scene where, without spoiling anything, there's the romance. It's going to sort of play out. And there's a scene where you actually see the prince bare chested. And I quickly add that only his chest is bare, okay? But for a kiddie movie, it's a rather, I don't want to say suggestive, but it's just a rather unusual thing to suddenly have, because it seems like at that moment in that scene, yes, it's totally handled within the confines of PG, but boy, if the shot went on for another few seconds or a different angle or whatever, you'd be getting into PG-13 or beyond. And then the adults would have to have a certain conversation with their children on the drive home. How do you feel about that? I think that I almost would want to have that whole aspect cut out entirely, or at least downplayed. What do you think?
Yeah, I completely agree. And I'm not talking about prudery. I'm just talking about, like you said, the tone of the movie. Suddenly it shifted into this whole other gear. I didn't think that you need the scene at all, let alone shirtless. They could have done it without throwing that in there. I just thought that was a misstep. There's probably a meme being made about it even as we speak.
We're both sharing a reservation we have about the tonal balance in the film. It's aimed at kids. It's pretty much having a lighthearted approach to some, reasonably serious material. We're agreeing that this romantic plot or subplot maybe could be excised entirely. And, in a PG movie, it's sort of pushing into PG-13 or beyond territory. It's kind of distracting that way. But that also ties into the reservations we have about Jeff Goldblum as the Wizard of Oz. That he's got some edge as an actor, and the character's got some quirky and disturbing qualities. He's really not likable at all. And I think it sort of throws the film off quite a bit there. Unlike in the original where Frank Morgan, he's a con man, a charlatan, this and that, snake oil salesman, as I keep saying, but essentially gentle and likable, and it all turns out well, and you can all smile and wave at the end when the balloon takes off. This is something that in this film, I don't think it quite knows how to handle borderline disturbing, or at least, let's say, mature considerations. And not everybody in the world is nice. And that's one of the things that Glinda's discovering, right? That the Wizard of Oz isn't that PR front or facade, that there's a rather mean person behind it. And Marie, let me defer to you on this, because you know so many of the source books, in terms of, first of all, how do you feel about the way it's being handled here? But then secondly, what might have been more effective and more pleasing?
Well, I think the spirit of the book is found in the original Wizard of Oz. And that character who, as you described, is sort of hapless. He's sort of feckless, and he is a fraud. We meet him at the very beginning of The Wizard of Oz. He's like literally selling snake oil, I think, and, telling people fortunes and stuff. But he's not malevolent. I think what the story's missing in this is a turnaround for the character, a double take when he realizes his role. You get a small one with Nessa, and both Nessa and Elphaba. There's no real arc. He's just a cardboard cutout of a villain. And he does not pay for what he did, which is, what happened to the production code, Mike?
Well, at least we don't see him bare-chested.
All right. Well, for that, let's leave it at that. And
Count your blessings. Count your blessings.
Let's move on to our second movie, which is Rental Family, with Brendan Fraser in it, which, first of all, I love the premise that there's actually a business in Japan where you can hire somebody to pretend to be your fiance or your business partner or any sort of role you need. You need to go to a wedding where you have to show people how well you did. You can hire somebody to go with you. I think that is a fascinating premise. So I would watch the movie anyway. But Brendan Fraser, come on, I love Brendan Fraser. So I don't know where you stand on this movie, Mike, but I'm going to let you set it up how you like. But I'll just say off the bat, I absolutely loved this movie.
Well, you actually have lived in Japan, so you know the culture firsthand. And yes, it's an actual cultural practice in Japan. And again, Japanese society in some ways emulates American, and they know our culture as well as we do, right? but there are distinctively Japanese aspects to Japanese culture. One of them is that there is a social, not quite taboo, but something frowned upon is what we would call mental health counseling or family therapy, whatever. It's just really not something that's done extensively or talked about openly, looked on favorably. So what happened in Japan, and as Marie pointed out, this is an actual practice. A rental family, you can hire an actor who can play your groom or who can play your grieving widower, all these things. And some people would be in the know and would know and accept it. Other people would just, face value. And that face value is important here, would accept it, that you've come to the funeral, for instance, to grieve over the deceased, even though you're a hired actor doing that and you have a script and so on. That's a really interesting premise. And the film, I think, to its credit, really goes with that. I mean, Brendan Fraser, who I'll remind us, won the Oscar 3 years ago for The Whale. I mean, this is a really good role for him.
One of the characters I loved that they set up is this guy who just plays video games all day. He's like one of these really shy people who doesn't get out, doesn't get to do much. And he hires Brendan Fraser's character to be his friend. And so at first, he's barely able to open the door. He's just so shy and so anxious. And slowly, the door gets opened wider and wider every time he comes over. And Brendan Fraser just comes in and hangs out with him and plays video games. This is why Brendan Fraser is such a great person for this role, because he brings that energy where he is so kind. He doesn't look down on this guy, but he also doesn't really approach any of these jobs as a real actor. I mean, that's the missed opportunity here, is that he's supposed to be this out-of-work actor who takes this on because, I know I can play this role. I can play that role. Just tell me who I'm supposed to be. And one of them, by the way, is sad American at somebody's funeral. I mean, some things are just really, really funny. But he doesn't really inhabit the role so much as show up as Brendan Fraser every time, doing what Brendan Fraser would do. Brendan Fraser would show up and play video games with that guy. Brendan Fraser would show up as sad American with that sort of hangdog Brendan Fraser kind of thing, which is very appealing. All of the roles he plays are very predictable. You know exactly what's going to happen next. They set all these things up and then knock down all the dominoes, but it's still really satisfying because you see the setup, you have a really likable actor, and then, they knock down all the pins. I mean, there's nothing not to like. Yes, it's manipulative, but it also works.
A really great role for Brendan Fraser. And having just won the Oscar for The Whale 3 years ago, here as he plays this actor who's just sort of getting by in Japan, TV commercials, schlocky B movies, and so on. So he takes this job to pretend all these people, and it's a script, it's an acting role for him. And I have mixed feelings about the film, though I do really like it. Actually, it's extremely episodic because that's the nature of what he does. Right? He goes from one situation to another. Most of them are funny, but some of them kind of melancholic or at least ethically disturbing. And his boss actually puts it quite cogently, where his Japanese boss tells him, "We sell emotion." Where I have reservations about the film is several-fold. One is it raises a host of ethical worries that I have, at least, in terms of the integrity of what's going on here. The film skates over that rather lightly. It has a few scenes where it seems to really be getting into it, like how would your conscience deal with this? But there are other times where it's rather blithely just going through it. And I think, it doesn't probe very deeply there. It goes for the soothing and sentimental and ready emotions, as I call them. And I felt that too. I mean, I saw it with a preview audience where the audience was quite moved by it, and I was too in places, but still I was troubled that way. So that's one worry I have, is that it just doesn't quite work the material as seriously, as fully as it might. And that relates to my second reservation, namely that we are introduced to a number of what I'll call supporting characters or players, a lot of situations. Some of them are followed up on by way of, how did that relationship work out, or where did it go from here? Others are just left dangling. For instance, the Brendan Fraser character has a connection, a relationship of some sort with a prostitute character, and then she's sort of there, and then suddenly she's gone, And there are things like that in the film that just seem, I don't want to say sloppy, but so much as not fully followed through on. So although it's emotionally satisfying, I think there's some ethical and character-related elements that are left dangling. But Marie, to your direct point, it is a really likable film. And so even as I'm voicing reservations about it, I really enjoyed watching it. It was fascinating by way of material, and the audience really liked it.
Yes, I saw it with a very small group of people who, and while I was leaving, Mike, one of them was Anita. We both, were exclaiming in the hallway about all the things we liked about the movie. So I had a little bit of a rehearsal of what I knew I liked, and that kind of thing. I was making some of the points that you made about how likable I found the character, especially in the scenes where he, pretends to be the friend of the guy who's shut in the house and playing video games. I thought that was played with real sweetness. It's almost an aside. He's not an important character. Like you said, they introduce us to all kinds of characters. But the weak part, I thought, was that Brendan Fraser, who is an amazing actor, never does any real acting or prepping for these roles where you could see, how this would be an opportunity for an actor before you thought about all this ethical problems. He just shows up as Brendan Fraser every time. And I will say, in terms of the ethics, I did think with one of the stories, I don't know how they're going to resolve this, but I thought they did beautifully. So I was surprised by that.
Yeah, thank you for voicing another thing that had troubled me about it, namely that, it's very much a theatrical film by way of, an actor's life and travails and so on, and such an unusual situation for an actor to be in. At that level, I wanted more of we get the day-to-day of here's your next job and go to it. But you're absolutely right, Marie. I wanted more of a sense of, you've got a script, and there are some scenes where it's indicated, but you've got a script, you've got to rehearse this, you've got to become somebody else. The film could have done much more with that. And it actually would have been really interesting, just at a very practical level of, well, should I wear my hair differently? Should I have a different accent? Should I this or that? That would it would have been ideal. Let's say if it had been made 60 years ago, it would have been an ideal role for Peter Sellers, right? How you become all these different people. And I thought that, and it's no fault to Brendan Fraser's because he enters every scene and as an actor, he pulls it off. But that's at the level of scripting and direction where you could have done a lot more with that. As in, well, now you're going to play somebody totally different. Now you have a new identity. Boy, couldn't they have had a terrific load of fun with that? What do you think? I mean, that could have been really when I say a hoot, I don't mean in a dismissive or flip way, but just all the fun they could have had at the level of, whatever his costume should be and his identity.
Yes, I agree. It was a complete missed opportunity in terms of the premise. And since we did have a really fine actor in the role, they could have done so much more with it that would have been fun. The other thing that I thought was just a glaring problem is he's in Tokyo, right? And he's Brendan Fraser in Tokyo, and he's pretending to be all of these different people. And there's not going to be any overlap, as if he can blend in, no one's going to notice Brendan Fraser in all these different places. I think he would stand out like a sore thumb.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. I mean, I've read about that cultural practice in Japan, but I would like to know more about it. And this is one reason why. There are some situations where you could imagine him entering a scenario and somehow the other characters would either just totally believe that's who he is and he's not an actor, that's who he is, or at least somehow could kind of wink and nod and okay, he's here. But there's scenes where it doesn't quite play. It doesn't quite at the plausibility level. Well, wouldn't he really, as you're saying, wouldn't he really stand out in that particular scene? Wouldn't somebody lean in and say to the spouse, by the way, who's that guy over there? He's not a member of the family, is he? You just have to sort of take it at face value there that it's just, this is the situation and now he's doing this or doing that. But you got to wonder, in terms of character psychology, what are some of them thinking? How many people are in on it? They know he's a paid actor and we're all following form because form is everything, right? We're face value. And how many people might be genuinely deceived by it? There's squishy scenes where I'm not quite sure. And honestly, I'm not quite sure the filmmakers even asked that question. You know what I mean? They just went on to the scene.
Yeah, I agree. But I will say at the heart of it, though, it's a very sweet movie. I enjoyed the places it was taking me. I saw where it was going. And I was on it for the whole ride. And I loved this movie. It just had such a great feel to it.
Yeah, it's a real crowd pleaser that way. It's a genuinely sweet and nice film. And so, I don't have reservations about stating my reservations. but having said them, I say, yeah, I thought I didn't like this or that, or they could have done more here or there. But you know what? Watching with the audience emotionally, it really does work on you. And that's to the credit of the filmmakers, despite all those caveats and reservations and things I would have done differently. So what? At a certain level, you go with the flow. And there were people who were crying and really pulled into some of the scenes. So, due credit there.
That does bring us to the end of this episode. But don't forget to check out our other episodes at atmhcc.podbean.com. And we'll see you next time at the movies.
Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed what you just heard, we have a whole universe of podcasts waiting for you. Simply search Dragon Podcasts wherever you get your podcasts. You can also explore our full lineup and discover new shows at podbean.com/dragonpodcasts. That's podbean.com/dragonpodcasts.